Hello and welcome to our presentation on the 2010 Chilean earthquake and tsunami. The 2010 Chilean earthquake and tsunami was a geophysical disaster. This means that the disaster derived more from the physics of the earth rather than the atmosphere and the weather itself. This geophysical disaster in particular consisted of an 8.8 magnitude earthquake following a tsunami with waves up to 14 meters high. This geophysical disaster occurred off the Maule coast of central Chile. Maule is a relatively small city in Chile. At the time, its population was approximately 17,000 people. But what exactly happened during this geophysical disaster? The earthquake and the tsunami occurred on February 27th of 2010. The 8.8 magnitude earthquake struck its main target of Maule at 3:34 a.m. local time. Residents of Maule had mentioned that they had felt aggressive and extreme violent shaking. Although they were the main target, neighboring cities had also felt the effects of the earthquake. Some cities had felt it just as aggressive, others had felt it at a minimum of shaking. And this is like every other earthquake, it just depends on the location you're in. But this shaking was so aggressive in certain locations that it ranked as the 6th largest earthquake ever to be recorded by a seismograph. After the earthquake, the tsunami arrived at its main target of Maule approximately 2.4 hours after the main shock. There was the span of 2.4 to 4.5 hours when the tsunamis had arrived. I say tsunamis because there was more than one. And this was the main reason why the tsunamis had reached as far as north. They even reached San Diego. San Diego was even feeling the effects. And because there was, these leading up little ones that had followed up the main tsunami, there was multiple floodings in numerous cities. In fact, 53 countries were warned of this tsunami. And according to field observations, the heights of the tsunamis had reached up to 14 meters high, like I mentioned. On March 10th, Swiss reinsurance company estimated that the Chilean quake and tsunami would cost the insurance industry between $4 and $7 billion. This was because of the high amounts of damage that occurred after the earthquake and the tsunami. And even though Maule was a very small city, they were very compact. Buildings were right next to each other. And not to mention, Maule wasn't really financially stable as other countries, meaning their buildings weren't as prepared. Although they did have procedures down and they did know what to do during a tsunami, their buildings weren't stable enough to make it through the earthquake itself, yet alone the following tsunami. So it did result in high amounts of damage. And due to this damage, over 81,000 houses were destroyed, and an additional 109,000 buildings were severely damaged. Not to mention, in addition to all this damage, so many people were injured. Thousands of people were injured, but 521 people were confirmed dead. And this does not consist of the people who were missing. People were missing and they were never found. So this only consisted of the confirmed deaths that were made.
The science behind the geophysical disaster. Chile, as we know, has had its fair share of earthquakes. This is due to the fault line that it lies on top of, which stretches approximately 500 kilometers parallel to the coast. The two plates that interact here are the Oceanic Nazca Plate and the Continental South American Plate. These two plates converge at approximately 8 centimeters per year. At these plates, they subduct, so the Nazca Plate moves below the South American Plate. While they do this, they may become locked and have a buildup of energy and pressure, and once they slip, that's when we get our earthquake. This slip that occurred in 2010 caused an 8.8 magnitude earthquake. The rupture itself was bilateral, meaning from the epicenter it traveled both directions across the boundary. The epicenter was located 35 kilometers below the surface. The rupture actually covered 600 kilometers, or 370 miles in 2 minutes, which is incredibly fast. Approximately 500 million tons of TNT is the equivalent to the amount of energy that was released by this earthquake. So the tsunami that occurred after was relatively small in comparison to the earthquake, which is surprising because an 8.8 earthquake is extremely large. In the local areas, there was a decent amount of destruction because of the tsunami. However, across the Pacific, not much energy was able to travel from the tsunami and cause major damage anywhere else. This is partly due to the size of the tsunami, partly due to the fact that the emergency tsunami warning system was working pretty well. The tsunami was not that large because the area where the earthquake actually occurred was pretty shallow. So the water column that was displaced wasn't extremely big, and it wasn't able to quite have enough energy to travel all the way across the Pacific. So the picture on the left here is a photo from NOAA of the actual energy that traveled across the Pacific from the tsunami. And the picture on the right is a photo of the fault line, and it has a picture of the actual earthquake and the aftershocks. The actual earthquake is depicted by this red star, and all the other yellow dots are aftershocks that followed.
This slide is based on the general statistical facts of the 2010 Chilean earthquake and tsunami. The rupture of the earthquake was about a 300 to 375 mile stretch and was felt by surrounding areas such as Brazil, Sao Paulo, and Buenos Aires, Argentina. There were 50-foot waves that were observed. Additionally, certain waves were moving extremely fast across the Pacific Ocean at a speed of 450 miles per hour. These hit the Juan Fernandez Islands. Although building codes were improved during the 1960 earthquakes and several times after, this earthquake caused damage to about 400,000 homes. Bio and Male were particularly affected. With this being said, major services were shut down, including electricity, gas, and water. Electricity being shut down resulted in less fires, which in turn resulted in less death as well. While 12 million people felt strong shaking, it was estimated by the government officials that more than 2 million people were affected. The Chilean National Emergency Office is responsible for reporting the number of deaths. They reported 521 deaths, while 150 were from the tsunami itself. More were still needing to be accounted for. This number was well above 800 until some missing people were found. Then the death toll lowered. 17% of GDP, more than $30 billion of the country, is the total economic loss. This next slide is the significant impact on human history. Hundreds of people died. Some say it may have been able to be prevented. Millions were affected, and a great deal of destructions occurred. People may move or become homeless because they cannot afford to move. Some say this could have been prevented because warning signs were ignored, and also they failed to notify residents of the disaster. What have we learned? Do not ignore warning signs. It is better to have a false warning than no warning at all, because it could save lives. Buildings can always be improved to become more stable, because it can save lives as well. It is important to have a quick emergency response no matter where you are. It It is also important to inform volunteers of emergency plans before it is too late and the disaster has already occurred. Turning off electricity can reduce possible fires during an earthquake and save lives and limit destruction. Lastly, it is important to inform yourself of earthquakes and tsunamis to help yourself respond quicker. These are all actions that they took to decrease death toll numbers in these areas during these times. This is our works cited slide. Thank you for watching our presentation.